Well, that was, what was that? One of the criticisms levelled against The Mandalorian was that it was too cautious. It pushed no boundaries. It did not obviously want to be a landmark production. As I mentioned in my preview to the Book of Boba Fett, this I think proved to be its strength and the reason it proved so popular with fans. We've had to put up with boldly individualistic directors who prefer their lore to the Star Wars lore for far too long. So keen were they to leave their stamp on the Star Wars galaxy, the galaxy itself was spurned. No attempt was made to have the story of the sequel trilogy placed in any kind of relationship with what went before it, and Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, and this perfectly spherical testicle skipped over 30 of the most interesting years of what once passed for Star Wars canon, foregoing world-building entirely, and attempted to round off, and so to claim for themselves, a saga that was finished by better men almost 40 years ago. The Mandalorian took the bold and unconventional decision of giving the fans what they wanted, bringing them back into an established and well-loved galaxy, refamiliarizing us with the names, the places, the characters. And it achieved this by keeping its story on a small scale, allowing us the time to appreciate its setting. No Skywalkers, precious few lightsabers, no grand stakes, in Season 1 anyway, but rather an exercise in careful world-building, which only began to hint at a grander arc once it had firmly rooted us in time and in place. If one is being charitable, the Book of Boba Fett takes a similar approach, but I think it's worth recalling some of the doubts I set out in my preview video, namely that it's possible to reveal too much about Boba Fett and to overindulge in backstory and nostalgia to achieve this at the expense of a new story that deserves to be told. Frustratingly, Episode 1 has neither confirmed nor dispelled these fears. In fact, it's a very hard thing to review, which is not a concern I'd anticipated. The Mandalorian took some time to place itself in its grander context, but it had a definite local storyline almost from the off. Baby Yoda wasn't merely a marketing gimmick, he was a MacGuffin first and foremost, and then a purpose, and then a tool to bind together what might otherwise have been standalone snippets of the daily life of a bounty hunter. It amounted to slow and careful storytelling, but you did at least know what the fundamentals of the story were and would be. This cannot be said for the Book of Boba Fett, the first episode of which was, I'm sorry to say, underwhelming. This isn't to say it can't improve, but it seems to have been hampered by some odd creative decisions, making mistakes other Disney Plus series like WandaVision and Hawkeye, whatever their other flaws, did not make. First amongst these, nothing really happens. Other series have compensated for this by launching with multiple episodes. Hawkeye launched its first 2 episodes simultaneously, and in so doing gave themselves time at least to attempt to establish their world and the goals within it. The Book of Boba Fett chose not to do this. And unlike The Mandalorian, it doesn't have very much time to make up for this false start. Episode 1 comes in at under 40 minutes, and there are only 6 episodes left. I understand that the ultimate goal for both these series, as well as Ahsoka, a production on which starts next year, is to do something analogous to the MCU, building a universe through standalone entries, with the occasional crossover, culminating then in a big ensemble production. But this shouldn't mean that the standalone productions are seen as less important. They should still be made as if they were their own beginning and end. They need their own stories to tell, and those stories need to be meaningful. After all, they're responsible for the universe in which any ensemble production would be set, for the relationships within it, for the history that precedes it. It's not enough for the Book of Boba Fett to be a love letter to a fan-favourite character, nor even a character study of the same. It's not enough to say, look, this is what Boba Fett got up to after he fell into the Sarlacc. We need to know what he's doing now, and why what he's doing now matters. I said in the preview video that there was a risk, hinted at in the trailers, of too much backstory, and backstory was certainly the main interest of the writers in Episode 1. Modern-day scenes weren't interspersed with backstory was interspersed with modern-day scenes. It would be very unwise for the series to persist in its attempts to span 2 separate timelines across just 7 short episodes, yet that would so far at least appear to be its intention. Episode 1, in the present day, sees Boba in a Bacta tank dreaming. His dreams are flashbacks, some of which are familiar. We see the scene from Attack of the Clones of young Boba lifting up Jango's decapitated head. Some are unfamiliar, and these end up forming the basis for the other timeline onto which we'll shortly come. Once he's up and he's dressed, we see him taking Jabba's throne and receiving tribute from various of Tatooine's ungreat and ungood, all save the mayor of Mos Espa, who, in fact, demands tribute via the emissary he sends in his stead. This is all well and good. It reveals a lot about the world and Boba's place in it in a relatively short scene. It hints at the trouble he's going to have establishing the kind of dominance once enjoyed by the Hutts. Then he visits a cantina in a kind of respectful mafia-style shakedown, receiving their tribute too, for, one assumes, protection? Though given he's only just arrived on the scene and has no network of his own to speak of, one wonders why the establishment's owners are quite so keen to pay up. He and Fennec Shand leave and are ambushed on the streets of Mos Espa by some free-running goons from Assassin's Creed. The fight scene that follows is awkward. Temuera Morrison is 61 years old now, and you can tell. He's stiff and he's slow, which is at least explicable in this timeline, but is somewhat less so in the one set around a decade previously, where the same problems are apparent. You can get around this by turning him into something of a tank, willing and able to absorb damage in the sure knowledge that A, he can take it, and B, he can pay it back with interest. But the Book of Boba Fett hasn't quite decided on its fight aesthetic yet. With the help of some retained Gamorrean guards, they beat back the attackers, who go parkouring away, and Fennec is sent to chase them down, which brought back unpleasant memories of chasing those damned couriers across Florentine rooftops in Arse Creed. Fett, injured again, is dragged back to the Bacta tank, which has unfortunately come to resemble a narrative device. I hope this is a habit the next episode breaks, but it seems for now that whenever Boba goes into the tank, the series will take this as an excuse to do what it really wants to do, which is more backstory. It's also not clear, perhaps I missed something, why he needs to be in the tank at all in this timeline, given that these events are set alongside the Mandalorians, and he didn't have to disappear every 5 minutes in that series to marinate in healing soup. The argument will be that he's still healing from his Sarlacc wounds a decade after the event, it should be said, and he does look a little better in this timeline than he did in The Mandalorian, but this is more than a little bit contrived. He was in his armor when he was swallowed by the Sarlacc, and he was in his armor when he escaped from the Sarlacc, and his armor emerged from the belly of the beast without any extra wear or tear. And that is the sum total of the new in this episode. He wakes up, he goes for a walk, he gets attacked, and he goes home. The other timeline is much more eventful. But again, this is all set around a decade ago. The Mandalorian's second season is set 9 years after the Battle of Yavin. This season nominally picks up from the end of that season. This all has some utility, though to me that seems to be quite limited. We see Boba in the belly of the Sarlacc, we see him burn his way out of it and emerge from the Tatooine sands. And I'm not sure we even needed to be shown this. Everybody knows. Certainly anyone who is a fan of Boba Fett knows, and so most people likely drawn to this series know that he escaped the Sarlacc. We can glean this from the fact that he turns up again in The Mandalorian and is very much alive and not eaten. He promptly passes out and is stripped of all his armor by Jawas and then rescued by Tusken Raiders for reasons that are not immediately apparent. The Mandalorian likewise tried to humanize the Tuskens. I think the original Knights of the Old Republic was the first such attempt. And that's all well and good, but in this case it's not immediately clear why any of this was necessary. It doesn't quite make sense. The Tusken Raiders revive him, only then to drag him across the desert behind a bantha until he passes out again. Then he wakes up at their camp and is whacked a few times by Tusken children, who are really quite irritating, and one can kind of see why Anakin didn't spare them. He escapes once, disarming and knocking a Tusken child to the ground. He has an opportunity to kill said child, or otherwise severely maim or incapacitate it, but he doesn't. And this is a curious decision, given that this timeline is set, one presumes, mere days after Boba's last appearance in Return of the Jedi, when he's very much portrayed as the ruthless, merciless assassin until George Lucas got his way and killed him off in a comic relief style manner, unbefitting the character. I said in my preview video that Boba is not someone about whom it actually pays to learn too much. You could, in the present-day timeline, have found some way to explain this, to show why he's gone from ruthless killer to well-formed and conscientious human being, but the Book of Boba Fett has chosen to alter or add to the original trilogy's version of Boba, and I'm not sure that works. Playing with the source material is one thing, altering the source material is something else, and I don't think it should be done except in truly rare and extraordinary circumstances. He's captured again and is beaten up by what is, I assume, a Tusken woman, whose skill with a quarterstaff, and it is more a quarterstaff than a gaffy stick, is suspiciously honed. Choreographed even. Apparently there is such a thing as Tusken kata in the Star Wars universe, and then he's knocked out and chained up again. Having thus revealed himself to be something of a skilled fighter, you might think the Tuskens would at least double their guard, though it's still not entirely clear why they've kept him alive in the first place. But the day after, he's sent off with nothing more than a Tusken child and a good boy, a massive, to use the actual name for the Tuskens' dogs, to a moisture farm, recently raided by one of Tatooine's plethora of criminal gangs, and there he is made to dig for water with his bare hands. Water is to be found in small eggs or seed pod type things, and to the extent we really needed to be shown how moisture farms on Tatooine worked, I'm not sure this is the most believable of explanations. They accidentally unearth a four-armed centipede meets centaur type monster, and the Book of Boba Fett deserves some credit for resorting to practical effects above CGI where possible. It's not completely practical, of course, but it is practical enough. Its movements and Boba's interaction with it are then much more physical and real than could be achieved, or than George Lucas would have been satisfied with, had he spent the entire scene fighting a green box or an eyeball on a stick in a green room. He saves the Tusken child's life, again, and for this he's released from his bonds. They return to the Tusken camp, the Tusken child waving the creature's head about, and Boba is accepted into the tribe and given a water egg by the chieftain. And that's it. I mean, that's everything. That's all of Episode 1. I've separated the two timelines out of ease for explanation, it should be mentioned. The episode itself prefers to intertwine them, which not only makes it harder to summarize in a review, but also makes it appear as though less happens than actually does, which is saying something, given that very little appears to happen in the first place. Were I to pick a word to sum all this up, it would again be underwhelming. This isn't a final judgment. We are only one episode in, after all, but it's not especially promising given, again, this is a short episode and there are only 6 left. Moreover, there's no indication that the series will abandon its split timelines approach. Perhaps I'll be proven wrong, but it seems highly likely to me that the writers think there is much more to be done with Boba and the Tuskens, and that could be made to work. It could work, for instance, if it becomes consequential in the present-day narrative, but we need a huge amount more by way of present-day narrative for that payoff to be possible in the first place. And if the Book of Boba Fett continues to split its timelines in this way, and to give equal time to the two, I just don't see how it has enough time to construct a present-day narrative in the first place. It gives the unfortunate impression that the writers, Jon Favreau for the most part, don't actually have much of a present-day narrative to work with, so they're trading in the main on nostalgia. The Mandalorian, and more recently Spider-Man No Way Home, show how you can weave nostalgia into a meaningful, new story. And I've said before, and I'll say again, that I very much like Jon Favreau. If there's anyone in the Star Wars universe and the Star Wars team who can do this, it's him. It follows that there is no reason to dismiss the Book of Boba Fett as mere filler. It could still turn into something worth watching for more than a memberberry hit. But if that's to happen, it needs to pick up the pace. It needs to rebalance itself toward the present at the expense of the old. It needs to tell a story in the universe as it exists today, and not content itself with harking back to the universe as it existed then. Ideally, the subsequent episodes would also be at least double the length, but I'm not sure that's something they'll be able to change at short notice. It could fail at this and still be better than the sequel trilogy. Well-crafted fan service might lack ambition, but giving the fans some of what they want is infinitely better than forcing testicle vision on them and giving them the finger when they complain about it. But the Book of Boba Fett still represents an opportunity. And where there is an opportunity, there is always the chance that that opportunity will be missed. As I said in the preview video, I was cautiously optimistic then. Now I'm slightly less optimistic and considerably more cautious. But I really want to like this show. So please, once again, do not cock this up.